All right. I need to check my email, see what's going on with the fans. Here's one from a Mrs. L. Durgan. Dear BBOP guy. Okay. I'm writing you because I listened to the show last week and I just had to write in. During the opening, you said you were going to talk about the roles of the baritone sax and bass trombone in a big band. There was a lot about the sax player, including an interview, but I didn't hear much about the bass trombone. When I got to the end of the show, I have to say I was disappointed. You gave some nice information, but there seemed like so much more you could have said about the biggest, most powerful instrument of the brass section. Anyway, I was hoping that maybe you could talk more about it this week. My husband, Ed, plays bass trombone, and he was really looking forward to hearing you talk more about it. Although it's not his birthday, I bet he would really appreciate it if you would, kind of like a little gift. Maybe you could even change your opening theme to something that features a great bass trombone part, just for this week, as a favor. It would mean a lot. Thank you for reading this, and I'll look forward to next week's episode. Wow, what a heartfelt and sincere letter. How could I possibly say no? Okay, Mrs. Durgan, or Drenge, or Drageen, or however you say your name. This is for you. Welcome to the BigBandology podcast. My name is Eric Dregney, and this is part 6 of Building the Big Band. The bass trombone playing style is known for creating deep, warm, soothing sonorities. Like a musical block of granite, its sound provides support and foundation for all of the other voices to sit on top of. There's another style that has developed over the past 50 years for the bass trombone. The approach is bigger, brassy, and much more edgy. That sound doesn't just cut, it rips right through the bottom of the big band orchestration. This week we look into the role, expectations, and mentality of a bass trombonist, from being supportive and blending with the other instruments, to rhythmically kicking the rest of the horn section and leading from the bottom. All of that coming up. I used to tell people that when I die, I wanted Siegfrieds' funeral march written by Richard Wagner played during my own final services. Not because I believe I'm godlike or worthy of some overly inflated send-off, because of the opening musical phrases and the raw and awesome power of the trombone section from top to bottom. There are 2 recordings that I really appreciate and consider to be definitive. One is the Great Performances release from the Cleveland Orchestra conducted by George Zell. I love Zell's interpretation of the piece. It is melancholy but triumphant. It is powerful but controlled. The sound of the orchestra is gorgeous. The second recording is from the Metropolitan Opera conducted by James Levine. Personally, I'm not as much of a fan of his interpretation. It's a little rushed in spots, which takes away a little from me. However, that recording is the signature version of the sound of darkness and death. The string chords at about 1 minute 26 seconds build with a sense of urgency and tells you that something is really about to happen. In 9 seconds, you are set up for the entrance by the rest of the orchestra. The brass notes at 1 minute and 35 seconds are not sound. They're hammer strikes on an anvil. Something enormous has happened in the universe after hours and hours of Wagner opera, and the music is doing its best to depict that. The trumpets and trombones are as edgy as you'll ever hear. There is no warmth of sound. Why does it sound that way? I believe there are 2 reasons. The tuba, which usually provides warmth of sound, is not playing. Second, because of bass trombonist Steve Norell. Even as the sound fades in those spots, you can still hear that bass trombone barking on the bottom at low volume. There is no love or comfort in the orchestration. It's sad and painful. When the sound comes back up, it's even heavier and edgier. You can hear the angry emotion being belted out and pushing the winds from the very bottom of the orchestra. Then it wanes again, but you can still hear that sound and color of the bass trombone all the way to the last chords before the mood changes. To me, bass trombonist Steve Norell is helping the audience realize the loss of Siegfried. There's emptiness and pain. That's communication through music. A composer can write what they hear, but the musicians have to interpret it together to tell the story. I think if Wagner heard that recording, he would say, "Yep, that's exactly what I meant." That's why I love that recording, and that's why I love playing bass trombone. I wasn't born to play this instrument. I had to learn it, and learn it fast. I played bass trombone for a couple of charts in my high school jazz band, but I was really the lead player. I didn't know, yet, that there was a sound and approach that you needed to have. When I got to Youngstown State in the fall of 1986, my trombone teacher, now Dr. Michael Christ, switched me to bass trombone, just to try it for my first year. The school had one, so I didn't have to go out and buy one, but still I didn't want to play it. I'd gotten a brand new King 4B tenor trombone for graduation, and I wanted to play that. However, he was the boss, so I switched. To take a step back, in the spring of '86, before I got there, I went to the final concert of the YSU Jazz Ensembles. There were 3 bands, but the Jazz Ensemble 1 was a force of nature. That band was better than any group I had heard that didn't have leaders named Maynard, Buddy, Woody, or Doc. My goal after that night was to go there and be good enough to play in that band by the time I graduated. I figured I could at least have a chance by my 3rd year to audition for it. The universe has a funny way to teach you things. That September, I auditioned and made first band. I definitely was not ready, but fortunately for me, director Tony Leonardi had very few options that year for bass trombonists, me and one other freshman. But he heard enough to take the chance on me, for which I will always be grateful. Our first concert was scheduled for the Monday before Thanksgiving. The theme of it was a tribute to Thad Jones. The very first chart of the very first concert I played with Jazz Ensemble 1 was Thad's Cherry Juice at what would be called Mel Tempo. If there was ever a true example of baptism by fire, that was it. But honestly, that wasn't the hardest chart for me. This was. That's Thad's chart called Tiptoe, and that fun little passage is written unison for all 4 trombone players and the bass player. It's hard enough to play it by yourself, but when you have 4 other people you have to match up with, play all the right notes in the same style, that's just not fair, especially to a kid who had just turned 18 years old a month before he had started college. The expectation for the band was 1,000 feet above my head, but nobody cared about that. The attitude was, suck it up. If you wanted to be there, then do the work. Thad's music was about technique. but I realized that I also needed to develop a sound. Just like Chuck McHenry mentioned in the last episode about playing baritone sax, you can't play a bass trombone like a tenor trombone. They really are not the same instrument. It's a different mindset and a totally different approach. Not only did I have to deal with the insecurities of being in a band where I felt like I was in way over my head, I also had to develop my playing style on the fly. Thankfully for my best friend growing up, Mike Kamoff, he gave me a cassette tape that put me on my path to playing bass trombone my way. He got a cassette from our friend Keith Turner of an album recorded by the Bob Mintzer Big Band called Incredible Journey. Mike gave me the tape and said, "Check out this chart in here called Computer, see what you think." That chart was what I used as the opening theme for this week's episode. Right out of the box was the baddest bass trombone cat I had ever heard, Dave Taylor. He was cranking out his part and was right on it with the rhythm section. It was loud, proud, and confident. I listened to that chart and then the others on that CD. In my very first podcast episode, I played a section from another chart on that album called Tribute. Bob writes a great little solo trio section at the end that features Dave. When I heard it, I laughed, I cried, I wanted to play it. In case you haven't had a chance to listen to that first episode, here's that clip. For my entire first year of college, I listened to that tape, especially that section at the end of Tribute. Later, I bought Incredible Journey on CD. Back in the 70s, there were a couple of features written for bass trombone. John LaBarbera wrote a chart on the Antonio Carlos Jobim tune Wave, which featured Buddy Rich's bass trombonist Bill Reichenbach. Pianist Toshiko Akiyoshi wrote a feature piece for her bass trombonist, Phil Teal, called I Ain't Gonna Ask No More. It was all Phil at the top playing deep into the basement range. Those two pieces were the goal pieces for many bass trombonists of that period. Here's a little from both. Those two pieces took the approach of the bass trombone that was standard for that era. The style was that low, smooth, velvety sound a la George Roberts. I mean, his nickname is Mr. Bass Trombone. I liked that sound, but it didn't really move me as much as that more modern Dave Taylor sound. Because of composers like Bob Mintzer, Tom Kubis, Gordon Goodwin, and others, the writing for the bass trombone chair grew throughout the 80s and 90s. There were moments when the bass trombone was essential to the motion of the piece. It could even double with walking a bass line. Here's an example of one of my favorite charts written by Tom Kubis called The Last Great Georgia Extravaganza. The a cappella brass solo is just absolutely silly, but it couldn't really happen without Tom's genius placement of notes in the bass trombone part. That was recorded in 1989 by the YSU Jazz Ensemble with yours truly. And man, that was fun, and that was the point. At the beginning of the episode, I talked about how music can elicit emotions just from a single phrase or even a note. Music speaks to us in ways we don't even understand, and sometimes it's just important to let it speak. When you listen to a group playing music they are very passionate about, that emotion comes out. In 1980, one of my favorite composers, Bob Brookmeyer, took over the musical director role for Thad Mell's band. Bob was writing pieces that were more orchestral and chamber-style music instead of your standard swing and big band stuff. He wrote a 3-movement suite called El Co., which features Clark Terry on flugelhorn. The second movement in that piece is beautiful and haunting, and a perfect example of what I mean by one note can create emotion. The bass trombone part plays this repeated low E, almost like a drone, while Clark solos. The player, Lally Bienenfeld, alternates playing the E down an octave into the deep recesses of the horn. It's an incredible effect that sends chills through you. I cannot stress enough how important it is to create your sound on your instrument. Not just bass trombone, but anyone listening to this that is a player. Dave Taylor is my biggest influence sound-wise. However, over the years I listened to Joe Alessi, principal trombone, and Don Harwood, former bass trombone of the New York Philharmonic. I listened to Jimmy Pankow from Chicago, and more of George Roberts, Phil Teal, and Bill Reichenbach. I even listened to the funky doctor Steve Kupka, baritone sax player for Tower Power. All of those influences and sounds and approaches shaped my playing. So to bring it all together, there is a final question. What is the role of the bass trombone in a big band? There are some parts of the job that are just like everyone else. Listen to yourself, listen around you, follow the lead trumpet, and play in time with the bass. Then there's the other roles like playing with the baritone sax and bass as a unit, and supporting the trombone section's sound. More important roles are setting the intonation for the brass and making sure that you're playing with an aggressive confidence that allows you to play on the front of the beat when needed to keep the rest of the horns moving. When you have parts in between the other horn lines, be strong and exact. You may be in the lowest range, but you are a leader through your role of support. And so for one last exclamation point, here's Dave Taylor at the end of Incredible Journey. Well, that wraps up another installment of Building the Big Band. I hope you enjoyed taking a walk with me into my experiences and approach as a bass trombone player in a big band. If you want to hear more of me, you can tune in every Monday and listen to the Sketch Anderson Orchestra, Cleveland's best Monday night big band. You can hear them on Facebook Live at 8 p.m. Eastern every week for one set of great modern big band music. You can follow the band on Twitter at SAO Jazz, on Instagram at SAO Big Band, And if you can, swing by the Patreon page at www.patreon.com/SAOBigBand to show your support. You can also email the show at bigbandology@gmail.com. The BigBandology podcast is sponsored by Best American Craftsman, BAC, makers of my custom bass trombone and Model 4 tenor trombone. BAC, get in the loop. Next week, we talk about another aspect of building the big band. Until then, I'm Eric Dragney. Thanks for checking in. Be safe and keep swinging.